Jasmine Crockett stormed into the Capitol with one envelope and shattered Trump's empire. One $8 million Project Crimson Shell company, and he cracked on the spot. If this was just the first receipt, what else is he hiding? Stay with us, this is a story worth every second of your time. Room 214 didn't feel like a hearing room. It felt like a bomb waiting for a spark. A lone spotlight hit the chairman's desk, throwing long shadows on the walls. The air was heavy, too heavy. Staffers sat frozen papers, untouched pens, gripped but motionless. No one spoke. No one even shifted. Even the ceiling fan turned slowly like a ticking clock. The silence wasn't peace, it was a warning. Something was coming and it wouldn't be quiet. At 12:43 sharp, the door opened. Donald Trump walked in like a general stepping back onto the battlefield. Navy blue suit, crisp red tie, sharp as a blade, gold cufflinks flashing under the light. 4 lawyers trailed him, plus 2 ex-Secret Service agents, and a pale communications aide who looked ready to faint. Trump didn't look at anyone he didn't need to. His presence drained the room of air. When he reached his seat, he dropped into it as if he had never left power. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, alone, calm. No staff, no aides, no theatrics, just her and a sealed folder that looked more like a weapon than paperwork. She didn't glance at him, didn't flinch. Her stillness carried one message: I came ready for war. Trump leaned back, crossed a leg, and smirked the same smug grin he'd aimed at every woman he thought beneath him. But Jasmine wasn't there to be dismissed. She was there to finish something. Chairman Mike Johnson finally cut the silence. This hearing concerns campaign finance activity and political fund transfers related to former officials. No names, but everyone knew. The line had been drawn. The match was ready. The fuse had lit when Trump sat down, but Jasmine struck the flame. She leaned forward, fingertips resting on the folder as if it were a trigger. Her voice was calm, even exact. Mr. Trump, she said, steady as stone, can you explain the $8 million wired from a Cyprus-based company into your political fundraising account 6 weeks before the runoff? Her words didn't echo. They exploded. The number, the timing, the precision, it hit like dynamite. The room froze. Chairs stiffened. A lawyer shifted like he'd been slapped. And Trump's eyes snapped to Jasmine, not with surprise, but recognition. He knew what this was, and he knew it was only beginning. Trump exhaled slowly and leaned forward, hands folded like a judge ready to deliver sentence. A thin smile crept across his face, poisoned and practiced. Then came the laugh. Low, fake, staged for cameras that weren't even there. Who do you think you are to question me, he sneered. Just another keyboard warrior from Texas, begging for 15 minutes. His voice wasn't loud. It was sharp-cutting, designed not to argue but to erase. A few heads turned stunned. A staffer near the exit looked like they wanted to run. Trump wasn't done. He flicked at his cuffs as if brushing away dirt. His stare cut back to Jasmine. You are a stain on this Congress, he said. A headline in a cheap suit pretending to matter. The silence that followed was crushing. You could hear someone gasp 2 rows back. Not because they were shocked, because they knew this was history unfolding raw and brutal. But Jasmine didn't move. Not a twitch. Not a blink. Her stillness was a blade. Her eyes stayed on the table like she alone could see the countdown. Slowly, with unnerving calm, she reached for her leather case. No sound. No rush. Just certainty. She pulled out a red envelope, thick, stiff, sharp at the edges, like it had cut its way through too many hands to arrive here. She laid it flat on the table, centering it like a declaration. Across the front, stamped in bold black letters, confidential. Trump froze. Just for a heartbeat, but it was there. A pause sharp and undeniable. A twitch in his jaw. A shallow breath. His smirk stayed, but something beneath it cracked. His eyes narrowed, locked on the envelope, like he could burn through the seal with his stare. And just under the bold letters was a symbol, tiny, unknown to most, but not to him. It belonged to a federal oversight branch that never stamped its mark unless it meant life or death. Trump recognized it instantly. Anyone who had ever dealt at that level of government would. He leaned forward, elbows tight on the desk, but he said nothing. Jasmine didn't lift her head. She didn't have to. Her silence had the whole room in its grip. She slid the envelope half an inch closer to the microphone, just enough for the cameras that weren't supposed to be rolling to catch its color, its weight, its finality. The air went icy, not just tense cold sinking into bone. This wasn't politics anymore. It was precise, personal, irreversible. Nobody spoke. Not Trump, not his lawyers, not his aides. Because when a red envelope lands on the table in room 214, everyone knows the game just changed. The envelope wasn't even open yet, but panic spread fast and Trump reacted like the fire was already roaring. The instant Jasmine's fingers brushed the seal, he exploded. His hand slammed the table like a hammer, loud, sharp final. The microphones rattled. Water jumped in glasses. One of his own lawyers jerked back in shock. "You do not have the right to present that trash." Trump bellowed, his voice tearing through the chamber like a shot. His chair scraped back as he leaned forward, face flushed and shaking with fury. Then he jabbed a finger at the air, barking the words like orders from a battlefield officer. "Remove her now." It wasn't procedure. It was personal, furious, desperate. Not about rules, about stopping the blast. Two Capitol officers stiffened along the wall, stepping forward together, hands hovering near their belts. Eyes locked on Jasmine. The room tilted with tension. You could hear the breath of people realizing a line had just been crossed. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't blink. She simply lifted one finger and pointed at the silver TX30 pin on her blazer. It caught the overhead light like fire. Her voice was flat, steady, sharp as steel. "I was elected to be here. No one has the authority to remove me, least of all someone under investigation." The officers froze mid-step, mid-breath. One looked to the chairman, the other flicked from Trump to Jasmine, then dropped his gaze. Their boots stayed planted. Trump's jaw clenched so hard you could almost hear enamel grind. His eyes bulged, his face now a deep crimson. Then, like something inside him snapped, he slammed the table again, this time toppling a glass. Water spilled, running fast toward the edge like it wanted out of the room. And then he screamed, raw, venomous, cracking. "You are a national threat," he roared, half rising from his seat. "You're filth in a tailored suit, a disgrace in credentials you don't deserve." No one answered. No one moved. The hearing had turned into something primal, wild, dangerous. But Jasmine stayed still, the envelope like a detonator waiting for her touch. Her shoulders squared, her jaw locked. And slowly the mood around her shifted. A congressman raised his head from his notes. Another pressed his lips, tight, stunned. At the back, a clerk killed their screen, not to disengage, but to keep from recording what should never be seen. The insults still hung in the air, foul and heavy, but now they were isolated. Loud, yes, but alone. Because while Trump raged, Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence had already beaten his noise. Trump's fury still echoed when Jasmine, calm, deliberate, moved for the truth that would silence him completely. With unnerving precision, she opened the envelope like disarming a live charge. Her fingers unfolded the heavy paper with the care of someone handling a grenade. She didn't speak, didn't blink. The tension shifted again from fury to cold expectation. Every gaze tracked her as she slid the page into the scanner and turned back toward the glowing screen. A low hum, a flicker. Then words appeared. "She's a problem. Handle it. DT." The signature slanted, unmistakable, etched in arrogance. The faint Mar-a-Lago watermark shimmered in the corner. A ghost of privilege burned into the sheet. No one breathed. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow. It wasn't just the words. It was the ink, the handwriting, the weight of the paper, the certainty that what they were seeing had never been meant to see daylight. Jasmine stepped back to her seat. She turned, her voice low but sharp, cutting the air like a blade. "You wrote this, didn't you?" "Mr. Trump." Trump didn't answer right away. His chest heaved like the wind had been knocked out of him. For a split second, his eyes stayed locked on the screen, his lips parting as if he might confess. But then something shifted. The color drained from his face, only to return as a flush of furious denial. "Fake, this is fake, worthless garbage." His voice cracked, too loud, too raw. It wasn't control, it was panic hiding behind volume. One attorney leaned in, whispering in his ear. Trump shoved him away. Another scrambled through a binder, desperate for something, anything to counter what everyone had just seen. But nothing came. Because every aide, every staffer, every senator in that chamber had seen that handwriting before. They knew. Jasmine didn't flinch. She gave no reaction. Instead, she turned to the chamber doors and gave the smallest nod. The double doors groaned open, and time seemed to shift. A figure appeared tall, steady, deliberate. A woman in her early 70s dressed in a navy skirt suit, her white hair tied into a perfect bun. No notes in her hands. She didn't need them. She carried memory, conviction, and fire. She stepped to the witness platform and rested one hand firmly on the table. Then she spoke. "I've seen hundreds of his handwritten notes. I worked in the West Wing. That," she pointed at the glowing screen without even glancing, "is absolutely his handwriting. No question." The silence that followed pressed heavy on the room. Not quiet, crushing, the kind that breaks spin, shatters ego, and leaves denial in ruins. And that's when Trump snapped. He snatched up a pen like a weapon and slammed it on the desk, the metal cracking against wood. His voice erupted wild and frantic. "You're all in on it. This is a setup, a conspiracy." But his voice betrayed him. The tremor was clear. It wasn't dominance anymore. It was unraveling. It wasn't strength. It was the panic of a man watching power slip like smoke through his fingers. And across from him, Jasmine Crockett stood still, unshaken, unmoved. Because now, for the first time, the paper spoke louder than the man. The ink on the page had barely cooled the room before another storm struck, not with paper, but with a voice sharp enough to cut steel. From the back, a woman rose slowly, like she had carried this moment for years. Elise Warren, Trump's former communications aide, stepped into the aisle with measured calm. She once wrote his speeches, crafted his image, shielded him from the truth. But now she was walking straight toward it. Without waiting for permission, she handed a silver USB to the technician. Her eyes never left Trump's face as the screen went black. She gave a single nod. Then the speakers filled the chamber. The first voice was unmistakable, low, commanding. "Trump's. She's trouble. Use whatever it takes. I don't want her in front of a mic again." A second voice followed, uncertain. "You mean politically, or more forceful?" A pause. Then the same male voice, colder, sharper. "Use your judgment." The effect was instant. The chamber froze solid. No chair moved. No throat cleared. Everyone sat rigid, the words slicing through the room with terrifying calm. It wasn't just what was said, it was how it was said. Cool, certain, the voice of command. Eyes darted across the room, each person silently asking if the others had heard what they just had. Jasmine stayed silent, gaze fixed forward. Elise crossed her arms, steady, daring anyone to deny it. Trump's reaction cracked the silence like thunder. He lurched forward, his chair screeching across marble. His face turned crimson, veins throbbing. His eyes blazed, fists clenched, sweat beating at his temple. Still, he forced a sneer, but his voice carried the edge of fear. "That's not me. That's AI deepfake garbage made by liars." The words came fast, sharp, desperate. But they didn't land with power. They landed like pleas. And the room knew it. Before anyone could react, the screen shifted again. 3 seals appeared: MIT Voice, Forensics, Georgetown Digital Labs, and Quantico Analysis. Beneath them, bold white letters glowed: Voice Authentication, 98.7% match. Donald J. Trump, 3 labs, 3 results, 1 undeniable truth. And with that, the silence in the chamber weighed heavier than any outburst could. The confirmation shattered every defense Trump had tried to muster. But it wasn't the evidence alone that broke him. It was his pride. Trump shot to his feet like a man pulled upward by force. His chair crashed backward, slamming against the hardwood and shaking his legal team. His face twisted, part fury, part fear, but his voice thundered over both. "I'm leaving. This hearing is a disgrace, an insult." He clutched his documents like armor, pressed them to his chest, and stormed toward the door as if escaping flames. The room stayed frozen. Even the stenographer's fingers hung midair, too stunned to type. For a moment, it looked like Trump might get away, that he would end this on his own terms. But then the screen behind him changed. The blue faded to a line of sharp white text. "Motion to compel. Passed." The words hit like a gavel. No cheers, no shouting, just the crushing stillness of history being made. An emergency motion had been triggered, voted on in real time, and passed. Legally, Donald Trump was now forced to return, not as a former president, not as a guest, but as a sworn witness under oath. He wasn't walking out of anything. At the far wall, a Capitol officer began to move. Not fast, not threatening, slow, steady, certain. He didn't touch Trump. He didn't need to. His silence and badge said everything. This isn't optional. This is law. Trump froze. He didn't yell. He didn't resist. He just stopped. The man who had shouted down judges and bullied entire rooms now stood stiff, his suit pristine, but his hands shaking around the papers he clutched. And then with his eyes narrowed and chest tight, he turned back like a man walking into his own cage. He sat. The chamber stayed still. Jasmine Crockett didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She leaned forward slowly, precise, sharp as a scalpel. "You called me a problem." Her tone was calm, but the weight behind it hit like stone. She let the silence hang heavy, then finished. "But your letter is the confession you'll never erase." In that moment, Trump didn't just lose the room, he lost the story. Before the words had even settled, Jasmine pivoted, lifted the remote, and with one click, turned the chamber into a war room. The lights dimmed as the projector buzzed to life. The screen filled with a glowing diagram line stretching across continents, boxes tagged with fine text. Not a simple map, a money trail, a hidden artery of cash pulsing red across the world. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, but each word struck like a snapped wire. A small Delaware company, no staff, no product, no filing, sent $8 million to an entity in Cyprus. She gestured at the first node. A red dot blinked on the U.S. coast, then pulsed as the line leapt overseas. From there, the money moved to a holding account in the Bahamas, then Seychelles. Finally, a private account at Al Fallah Bank in Dubai. Each stop lit up on the map, and with every flash, the air in the chamber grew thinner. Jasmine paused, eyes fixed not just on the members, but directly on Trump. He didn't move, but his knuckles whitened against the chair. No payroll, no business activity, no tax records. Her voice dropped colder. "This isn't a company. It's a shell, a mask for something else entirely." The chamber didn't erupt, it recoiled. No whispers, no movement, just the steady hum of the projector exposing a skeleton meant to stay hidden. She clicked again. A new file filled the screen, a scanned PDF, faint red watermark reading Trump International Ventures, internal use only. The camera zoomed. Top right corner, Project Crimson. Jasmine raised her hand, pointing straight at the name. Internal documents from Trump International Ventures identify this route with one code, Project Crimson. That code matches every endpoint we've just traced. The name itself, clinical engineered, hung in the air like a weapon. Now it glowed in towering letters behind the man who once ruled the world stage. Trump didn't flinch, but his breathing gave him away. Jasmine turned, nodding toward the back corner. A man in his 50s with silver hair and a sharp suit stepped forward, his badge reading Senior Auditor, Department of Treasury. He didn't bother with an introduction. He simply tapped a key, and on the screen the transfer patterns replayed animated loops of money moving like veins through the shadows. "What you're seeing is a textbook case of tiered asset displacement," the auditor said, his tone precise, almost robotic. "Shell companies with no activity built to exist only 6 to 10 days, then dissolved." He dragged his laser pointer across the glowing map. Each layer acts like a firewall. No single stop reveals the origin. No taxes, no legal footprint. The whole structure is designed to vanish. A click and the screen shifted again, showing metadata, timestamps, code fragments, and algorithmic commands buried in the payment trail. "This level of automation isn't amateur work," he continued. "It's crafted by specialists using financial systems usually reserved for state-grade laundering. This isn't just fraud, it's engineered evasion." The phrase engineered evasion hung in the air like a verdict. Jasmine stayed quiet. She let the silence settle, let it sting. Then her gaze turned back to Trump. He was still seated, still silent, but not still calm. This time he hadn't exploded. No insults, no shouting. Because what filled the screen wasn't rumor or accusation. It was numbers. It was code. It was undeniable. Red lines pulsed across the map again and again, looping between Delaware and Cyprus, Seychelles, and Dubai, an endless bloodstream of ghost money pointing back to one boardroom, one brand. Trump didn't touch his water, didn't whisper to his lawyers. His hands stayed locked, elbows stiff against the table. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen. His lips moved faintly, but no sound came, like he was rehearsing words he couldn't say aloud. The woman he had once mocked as a nuisance, the one he'd tried to dismiss and eject, was now the one standing in the storm's center. And he was the one pinned against its walls. For the first time since the hearing began, Donald Trump had nothing to say. And in that silence, the projector kept humming. The evidence didn't flicker. It burned. The glow from the screen had barely dimmed when the real silence came, the kind born not of fear, but of witness. Not just to scandal, but to a system. As the last frame of the global money trail disappeared, another voice rose, not one of power, but of consequence. She stood slowly, not hesitant, but measured. Naomi Estrada didn't need an introduction. Her badge read Independent Press, but her eyes carried something heavier, exhaustion sharpened into defiance. She hadn't come to testify. She had come to stop something. Naomi Estrada, Freepoint Investigations, she said, clear and steady. Heads turned not at her name, but at the force in her presence. She didn't walk like someone protected. She moved like someone with one chance. No security stepped in. No chair cut her off. Even Trump, slouched behind his lawyer, stayed quiet. Naomi wasn't a politician. That made her more dangerous. She was one of the few with nothing to lose and everything to say. From her coat, she drew a small manila envelope, edges bent a deep crease down the middle, where it had once been clenched too tight. She held it between two fingers, as if it burned, and set it on the table. Her eyes met Jasmine's. No nod, no cue, just recognition. It was enough. Naomi took a breath. Then she dropped the bomb. I hold a duplicate copy of the audio you all heard, she said, her voice low, steady. And you need to understand this came with a cost. No gasps, no whispers, only the tightening of the room itself. An aide set his pen down. A committee member shifted in his seat but didn't lift his head. Naomi pressed on. Her hand shook slightly now, not from nerves but from restraint, from what it took to say this out loud. She reached into her blazer and pulled out two folded sheets. The first was glossy, a photo. She lifted it high enough for the light to catch. This, she said softly, is my family. The image showed three people: her daughter, her mother, her younger brother, standing in front of a modest two-story house. Thick red ink circled each face. Chosen, marked. Then she raised the second sheet. Plain white paper, corners curled from being opened too many times. Naomi's voice broke the silence. 3 weeks ago I got this with the photo. It read, "Stories disappear. So can you." The chamber froze. Jasmine stayed motionless, but beneath the table her fists tightened. Everyone understood. This wasn't a warning, it was a threat. A threat aimed not at Naomi's facts, but at her future. Naomi set the photo and the note on the table. For a moment she just stared at them. Her face stayed steady, but her eyes, those eyes carried weeks of fear packed into a lifetime. I'm not here to destroy a legacy, she said. I'm here because I've spent the last year chasing a story that keeps vanishing into graves, erased hard drives, and unmarked wire transfers. And with every source I've lost, I've been left carrying a silence that never belonged to me. She tapped the envelope lightly, but in the charged room, the sound landed louder than it should. This is proof, but it's also memory. Memory of every girl who vanished without a headline. Every victim whose name was cut out of the record. Every scream that never made it past a padded office door. Across from her, a senator in a gray suit tried to meet her gaze but dropped it. Another scribbled something meaningless. Not notes, just escape. No one interrupted. They couldn't. Even Trump had gone silent, his usual scoffs and sighs replaced by a heavy stare at the floor. I don't have an army, no lawyers, no hedge fund money behind me, Naomi said. All I have is what I refuse to destroy. She pressed both hands on the table, steadying herself, not in anger, but in duty. I came forward because I know what it's like to be threatened and still choose to walk into the fire. Because if we don't stand for truth now, we'll keep burying facts before they even get to speak. She paused. This time her voice lowered, not from fear, but from resolve. I know what it means to risk everything. But if journalism means anything, it means standing even when your family is being used as a warning. The room was silent. Jasmine hadn't moved, her eyes fixed on the screen, but everyone could feel her standing with Naomi. And then Naomi added softer still, like she was leaving a mark for the record, for the chamber, for history itself. I didn't do this to expose one man. I did it because silence has been the most faithful accomplice in this country for far too long. I'm done being silent. She stepped back, nodded once to the technician at the console. No applause, no gasp, no grand gesture, only truth. And in that chamber, truth had a voice, a name, and a witness. As Naomi's words faded, the silence that followed wasn't hollow, it was bracing. No one moved. No one dared breathe too loud. Because in that stillness, truth wasn't abstract anymore. It had become action, and Congress could no longer look away. The chairman's gavel cracked down like a verdict, firm, sharp, final. The chamber will proceed with the emergency motion, he said, his voice flat, trying to stay ahead of the current coursing through the air. A murmur flickered, then died. Every eye shifted to the screen, where bold letters burned, "Motion to open full investigation. Donald J. Trump, on 3 counts." The weight in the room thickened. No one could pretend this was routine. The roll call began. Names answered one by one. Some replied with scripted defiance, nay. Others with brittle honesty as their armor cracked, yay. The board lit up, red, green, green, red. Then came the first fracture. A Republican name turned green. No gas, just a pulse of tension, like the chamber itself knew a line had been crossed. Then another green, then another. It was no longer a slip, it was a breach. 7 Republicans, 7 votes that rewrote the moment. Leaders who once defended Trump like blood oath now broke that oath in public. With those 7 greens, the chamber shifted from theater to history. Donald Trump sat rigid, his face carved from rage, his jaw-clenched eyes locked on the board as if he could command the lights to obey. But the screen held no loyalty, only numbers. And the numbers sealed it. Investigation authorized. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't stand, didn't celebrate. She only lifted her head slow, reverent, and turned her gaze upward to the rotunda's golden dome. Her face carried no triumph, only release, as if every dismissal, every insult, every attempt to silence her had led to this single wordless moment. A thank you whispered to no one and to everyone. Mike Johnson lowered his eyes. He didn't smile. No one did. Not the committee, not the press, not the weary aides and exhausted staffers who knew too well the difference between a show and a reckoning. No slogans, no cheers, no chants of justice, just silence, heavy enough to crack marble. The gavel struck once more. Session adjourned. But even those words felt strange. It wasn't closure. It was a break. Trump didn't move. His fists stayed locked under the table. His tie sat crooked, sweat still shining faintly across his brow from the storm minutes before. He hadn't shouted in the last 10. He hadn't insulted her. He hadn't even blinked during the final votes. He just sat, the man who once turned fear into applause, now stilled by a vote he couldn't drown out. Jasmine's gaze moved across the room, brushing over the faces of the Republicans who had broken rank. She didn't nod. She didn't comfort them. But in her steady expression, there was something unspoken. Not thanks, not forgiveness. Just recognition that for one brief moment, the system had split open enough for decency to seep through. Behind her, the screens went dark. The charts, the voice clips, the handwritten memos gone. What stayed was weight, a silence that wasn't empty but sacred. Aides began gathering papers slowly, carefully, as if packing too quickly might disturb the air still vibrating from the vote. A senator dropped his pen, and the sound cracked louder than it should have. No one looked up. At the back, a young woman in a blue blazer wiped her eyes. She hadn't spoken once, but her face, like so many others, spoke for her. This wasn't about winning. It was about being seen. Jasmine stayed seated a full minute after adjournment. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She was holding the silence, letting it do what words could not, etch the moment into the bones of everyone who had ever doubted that accountability could enter a room speaking in a woman's voice. When she finally stood, her chair made no sound. She gathered her papers, not like trophies, but like evidence still warm from fire. She didn't look at Trump. She didn't need to. He was still staring forward, his empire now reduced to the colors of a vote on a board. As she turned for the exit, the cameras finally allowed back in didn't shout her name. They didn't crowd her. They didn't need to. They knew the story was no longer about what Jasmine Crockett had said. It was about what the country had finally chosen to hear. And as she stepped through the doorway, her shadow stretching across the marble hall, the burden was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone now. The vote was cast. The gavel had fallen. But when the echoes of judgment faded, what remained wasn't victory and it wasn't revenge, it was silence. A silence heavy with consequence, one that stretched farther than headlines, louder than applause. As the Capitol lights dimmed and members filed out without celebration, something deeper began to ripple outward to living rooms, classrooms, courtrooms, to a nation holding its breath. And in that hush, Jasmine Crockett went home. It was late afternoon when she pushed open the glass door of her Dallas office, the same one that once felt too small for the weight she carried. Sunlight poured long shadows across the floor. The walls lined with case files and notes had seen her rise from State House grit to national firestorm. Yet today, everything inside was still. No ringing phones, no rushing staff, just the creak of a leather chair and the hum of air conditioning like the room was waiting with her. But on her desk sat something that wouldn't wait. A single envelope, plain white edges bent. No return address, but she knew at once it was written by a child. Across the front in green marker, the name Jasmine Crockett stretched wide, the J towering above the rest. She stared at it before touching it, letting the weight of everything else settle first. She had seen subpoenas, threats, praise, slander. She had faced men who built empires from silence. But this was different. This came not from power, but from belief. She lowered herself into the chair, letting it hold her weight. She lifted the envelope, tracing the uneven ink with her fingers. It was soft, worn, folded, too many times in small hands before reaching hers. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single page torn from a spiral notebook. No signature, just words. Words written with heavy strokes and uneven lines. "I don't understand what a shell company is," it read, "but I know who tells the truth, and I want to grow up to be like you." She read it once, twice, then stopped. The air seemed to pause with her. It wasn't the facts, it was the courage. A child too young to vote, too young to spell Cyprus, had seen what others refused. That truth isn't just in the evidence, it's in the fight for it. She rose, letter in hand, and walked to the window overlooking the city. The sunlight caught its creases, turning the page golden at the edges. Outside, life moved on, traffic, steady, people busy. But in that quiet office filled with briefs and unopened mail, something real had cut through the noise. She cracked the window. The late summer wind brushed her skin like a whisper she didn't need to answer. Because some letters don't need replies, and some truths don't need permission to echo. She set the letter against the window frame, not hidden, not sealed away, but visible. She didn't pin it or protect it. She let it stand as it was, as if it still had more to say. And in her heart, she knew it already had. This wasn't thanks. It was a passing of the torch, a quiet inheritance from one generation, fighting to speak to the next, learning how. Jasmine stepped back, arms loosely crossed, her eyes fixed on the note. She had spent weeks preparing evidence, bracing for backlash, facing down the most powerful man in the country on live television. Yet this torn page, written in blue pen with the faith of a child, struck deeper than any gavel. It reminded her why she walked into that chamber at all. Not for applause, not for headlines, but for someone who might one day stand where she stood and know they could. Her mind replayed it all: Project Crimson, the voice recordings, the red envelope, the vote that broke the silence. And now this, the letter scrawled in green marker with no logo, no party, no agenda. Just a single line worth more than 1,000 speeches. "And I want to grow up to be like you." She exhaled softly. Not relief. Release. As if every insult, every threat, every lonely moment at that podium had found its answer in the smallest voice of all. A voice that didn't demand justice, but trusted it could exist. A voice that didn't ask for power, only truth. In that moment, Jasmine didn't feel like a politician, or a fighter, or even a witness to history. She felt like a mirror reflecting what had always lived in people waiting to be seen. This child, whoever they were, had found that spark. And Jasmine realized she hadn't just exposed corruption. She had lit a match. The letter sat on the windowsill, sunlight washing its green ink like a quiet torch passed between generations. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. In the silence that followed, the real lesson began. Not in Congress, not in courtrooms, but here where courage meets consequence and truth finally gets a voice. Because this story proves something bigger. Power doesn't live in titles. It doesn't hide in golden towers or behind marble walls. It doesn't belong to those who shout the loudest or wear the finest suit. Real power, the kind that shapes history, comes from people willing to risk everything for what's right. And sometimes that power doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. On notebook paper. In the trembling voice of a woman who speaks when the world tells her to stay silent. Jasmine Crockett wasn't brought into that hearing to triumph. She was brought to be erased, to be humiliated on live TV so no one else would dare. But she didn't break. She didn't bend. She didn't read from their script. Instead, she did what few dare to do. She stared power in the face and told the truth. Not because she thought she'd win, but because she knew if she didn't, silence would. That's the lesson most people miss. We're told truth to power is a job for the brave few, the trained few, the chosen few. But this story turned that lie on its head. It showed you don't need permission to challenge corruption. You don't need clearance to defend dignity. You don't need a microphone to make noise. Because sometimes the loudest sound in the room is one woman refusing to back down. Jasmine never had to shout. Her silence carried weight. Every pause. Every moment she waited before dropping the next piece of proof. That was control. That was strategy. That was power. She didn't just fight, she dismantled an entire machine with nothing but the truth. Her message was unmistakable. Insult me. Investigate me. Try to erase me, but I will not disappear. So what now? What do we take from this story? Because this was never just about Trump, not just about letters, voice clips, or shell companies. This was about systems and the silence they rely on. For decades, silence didn't just shield corruption, it punished those who broke it. Jasmine cracked that shield, not with rage, not with revenge, but with evidence, with poise, with fire that was calculated, not reckless. And in doing so, she reminded us we don't just inherit broken systems. We decide whether they stay broken. This story isn't here to make you cheer. It's here to make you choose. Silence is easy. Silence is rewarded. But silence kills. It kills voices. It kills justice. It kills futures. The more we pretend neutrality is noble, the longer corruption thrives. Jasmine didn't stay neutral. She stood. She spoke. She risked everything to remind us truth matters, especially when it's inconvenient. And here's the hardest truth. The system never feared Jasmine Crockett. It feared people hearing her. That's why they tried to smear her, to discredit her, to throw her out. Because when someone refuses to play by rules written to protect the powerful panic. And now the blueprint is out. You don't need millions. You don't need permission. You just need the courage to keep standing when they order you to sit. Heroes aren't born in comic books. Sometimes they walk into a hearing with a red envelope. Sometimes they wear braids and get silenced for breathing. Sometimes they don't wait for the press to believe them. They open a folder and let the evidence speak. And sometimes they walk out alive, not because they were defended, but because they defended something larger than themselves. Jasmine Crockett didn't just survive that hearing. She rewrote it. She turned a chamber built to suppress into a courtroom for truth. And now the challenge isn't hers, it's ours. What will we do with the silence left after her last word? Pretend it was politics, call it theater, or recognize it for what it was, a warning shot wrapped in testimony, because somewhere a child just wrote a letter. They don't understand shell companies. They don't know why Cyprus matters or what a 98.7% voice match means. But they know one thing: they want to grow up and be like her. Not rich, not famous, just brave. And if we let that letter collect dust while we scroll, shrug and wait for the next scandal, then we don't deserve what she risked. The biggest threat to corruption isn't exposure, it's memory. The system can weather headlines. It can weather hearings. What it can't survive is us remembering, holding names, holding proof, holding the fire. Jasmine didn't come to entertain. She came to remind us the moment we forget they win. So if you have a voice, use it. If you were told to wait your turn, interrupt. If someone said your pain is too small to matter, say it louder. Because this story doesn't end with an investigation. It ends with a mirror, held up to each of us, asking one simple question. When it was your turn to speak, did you? The sound of that last gavel still lingers, but echoes mean nothing if no one answers them. Jasmine Crockett didn't fight for applause. She fought to hold up a mirror so this country could finally see itself. And now that we've seen what power looks like when it hides behind silence, the question is what we'll do with it. Because truth alone doesn't change systems. People do. And systems only last when the rest of us stay comfortable in our seats. But the chair is already on fire. And if we don't get up, we become part of the smoke. Change doesn't begin with a president. It doesn't start with a headline. It starts when an ordinary person decides they're done pretending not to see. You don't need a law degree or a news crew. You need conviction. You need memory. You need the courage to speak when scrolling is easier. Talk to your neighbors. Show up at city council. Ask hard questions at work. When injustice walks into the room in a tailored suit, don't look away. Stand. Because silence is what built the room in the first place. If you're angry, good. Stay angry, but use it. Put it into letters, petitions, phone calls, protests. Register to vote, then go further. Vote for those who protect the voiceless. Watch their records like lives depend on it, because for some they do. If leaders profit from silence, strip them of your support. Don't defend corruption just because it's wearing your party's colors. Truth is still truth, even when it hurts. And justice has never cared about comfort. Be relentless. Follow the money. Ask who benefits from your taxes. Who gets bailouts while kids go hungry? Why public schools collapse while lobbyists fly private? Who writes prison contracts? Who writes the sentencing laws? And why certain names never appear on subpoenas? When they say nothing to see, keep digging. When they say move on, look closer. You don't need a badge to uncover a system. You just need the courage to pull the thread, even when your hands shake. Remember the whistleblowers, the reporters, the survivors, the ones who told the truth when no one else would. Protect them, amplify them, and when their voices are dismissed, stand taller. Because every Jasmine who speaks in public represents thousands more who were buried before they had the chance. Their silence is an absence, it's warning. Ignore it, and we become the next chapter of the same broken story. The story where the powerful rewrite history in real time, while the rest of us forget we were supposed to be the editors. Teach the next generation that resistance isn't rage, it's responsibility. Let them see what it looks like to challenge a lie without flinching. Show them heroes who bleed, not just those who win. Teach them truth like it's oxygen, not opinion. Show them ethics aren't optional. Justice isn't a fad. That kindness and bravery aren't opposites. And when they ask why the world is unfair, don't cover it. Tell them the truth. Then show them how to fight for better. Stop waiting for permission. No one's coming to save us. We are the cavalry. And if you think you're too small to matter, remember this. They built entire systems just to keep you distracted, quiet, and afraid. That's how powerful you already are. So use it. Not someday. Not when it's easy. Use it now. Before someone else writes your story and calls it democracy. You don't have to be flawless to stand up. You just have to be awake. You have to break the pattern. Stop laughing at the wrong jokes. Stop pretending it's not your fight. Because the moment you say, not my problem, is the moment you help nothing change. But when you say enough, you join the fire that burns the lie down. So share the story. Not just Jasmine's, but yours. The truth you witnessed. The moment you realized the system wasn't broken, it was built this way. Talk about what you learned. About how power protects itself. About how sometimes the bravest act is refusing to be quiet. Make that refusal spread. Make your life a daily act of defiance. Not loud, not violent, just unstoppable. And when they try to scare you, let them. Fear means they see you. And when they see you, they know you're real. They know your voice has weight. Your presence has force. Your memory is dangerous. They know once you start, they can't unhear you. So don't stop. Don't back down. Don't give them the silence they need to live. The story didn't end in that hearing. It began there. And each time someone tells the truth, it grows louder. Each time someone pulls back the curtain, it shines brighter. Each time someone like you decides to really care, the ground shifts. Until one day the system built on silence will be surrounded by a generation that refuses to whisper. That's the power Jasmine Crockett handed us. Not a win, not a headline, a spark. What you do with it now is up to you. But a spark alone doesn't light the world. It needs fuel, something dry, waiting too long to burn. That's us. For too long, we've been soaked in silence. Shame surrender taught justice was too far, too slow, too heavy. But Jasmine's fire wasn't about her. It was about the fuel already here. Our anger, our heartbreak, our questions. All it needed was one spark. And now the smoke rises. Not just in Congress, in schools, in churches, in boardrooms, at dinner tables where families finally say, let's talk about what really happened. Because truth doesn't stay in one place. It seeps, it spreads, it seeps through cracks and foundations. And when it touches someone who's been quietly doubting something wakes. It's happening now. Teachers rewriting lessons, veterans rereading old papers, clerks reviewing expenses, survivors naming what they were told to forget, and voters finally asking why lies look presidential while truth begs for airtime. Jasmine didn't just win a fight. She rewired the rules. And here's the twist. It was never just about taking Trump down. It was about exposing the scaffolding holding him up. The donors, the fixers, the editors who softened headlines, the schools that stayed quiet, the churches that blessed him, the companies that cashed in, the people who said he's not perfect, but all of it, all of us. It wasn't just one man's corruption, it was a nation's convenience. And Jasmine, with nothing but a folder, and her voice shattered that illusion. She made it impossible to look away. And still, she never claimed to be a hero. That's what they'll rewrite. She didn't want statues, she wanted audits. She didn't want applause, she wanted systems. She didn't scream, she didn't sob. She stood. And in standing, she gave everyone else permission to rise too. That's why her impact lasts. Not because of charges filed, not because of headlines printed, but because somewhere right now a girl is practicing her voice in the mirror. A grandmother is opening a journal she locked for 30 years. A guard is rethinking loyalty. And a judge who thought no one noticed is sweating under his robe for the first time in decades. This isn't just legacy, it's ripple, it's weight. It's the oxygen truth needs to breathe. And pressure always makes people uncomfortable. Let it. Let the ones who laughed sit in silence now. Let the ones who said she's overreacting read the transcripts. Let the ones who rolled their eyes explain the bank wires, the shell companies, the voice matches. Let them try to wipe the stain that isn't on Jasmine's name anymore, but on theirs. Because the courtroom is public now. The record is public now. And so are we. We are witnesses. Not just to corruption, but to courage. We saw what happens when someone walks into the lion's den without armor, and instead of being devoured, teaches the lions to listen. We saw what happens when power laughs and truth doesn't blink. That clarity doesn't fade. It spreads. It pushes people to rethink what they thought was impossible. It makes someone bold at the dinner table. It gives another the courage to speak at work. It reminds a janitor that integrity has no price. It turns whispers into movements. So what now? We keep showing up. Not for drama, but for depth. We ask what else has been buried, who else has been silenced, where our focus has been pushed away on purpose. We stop chasing the distractions, the tweets, the noise, the outrage of the day. Because the real story is always behind the curtain. Real power is always scared of one thing: proof. That's what Jasmine carried. Receipts, records, steady calm. And they had no idea how to fight it. Because you can't gaslight someone who's already holding the match. And if you're reading this wondering if it matters, yes, it does. Because someone is watching you. Watching your silence or your stand. Your ease or your courage, your scroll or your resistance. You are either part of the pattern or part of the pressure breaking it. Never underestimate what one honest act can do. One piece of truth, one refusal to look away. Jasmine didn't need a title to change history. She needed focus. She needed timing. She needed to be done with pretending. And once she was, there was no turning back. There isn't for us either. History is paying attention. Not to the loudest, but to the most steady. The ones who didn't flinch, the ones who didn't sell out, The ones who walked in ready to lose everything but still chose to speak. That's the kind of country worth building. One where the record holds not just crimes but courage. Not just trials but truths. Not just noise but names spoken out loud so they can never be erased again. So speak, write, interrupt, refuse, listen, believe, protect, build. And when someone asks what you did while the powerful tried to bury the truth, you can meet their eyes and say, I didn't look away, I paid attention, and I spoke back. Maybe that's the final lesson. Power doesn't collapse with a bang. It fades in silence when people stop fearing it. Jasmine didn't end one man. She broke the myth that some voices are too loud to challenge, that some names are too big to question, that some systems are too old to change. In that chamber, with nothing but her breath, her evidence, and her will, she cracked the armor of untouchable power. And in that moment, she created something stronger than outrage: clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't need permission to speak, doesn't wait for applause to act, and doesn't vanish when the cameras shut off. So when people ask how this ends, maybe it doesn't. Maybe this isn't a period, but a pulse. Maybe the real victory isn't one man's fall, but the rise of a mirror held up to every office, every system, every home that has ever told the wrong people to stay quiet. Jasmine Crockett didn't step into history to become a hero. She stepped in because the truth had been waiting long enough. And now, because of her, it never has to wait alone again. The morning after the hearing, America didn't wake up, it jolted. Screens across the country flashed the same image: Jasmine Crockett, standing silent, the red envelope before her. Trump frozen in the background like a man caught in his own reflection. News anchors whispered words like historic and unprecedented. Headlines split the air. Congress authorizes full investigation. Trump under oath. The red envelope, what it means for American power. Crockett's silence that shook the system. And in kitchens, offices, classrooms, living rooms, ordinary people stopped scrolling. They started watching. The footage replayed endlessly. Trump slamming his fist, Jasmine pointing to her TX30 pin, Elise Warren handing over the USB drive, Naomi Estrada raising the photo of her family. Each moment carved itself into memory like scenes from a film no one could turn off. But the story wasn't about spectacle anymore. It was about consequence. In Dallas, a middle school teacher scrapped her lesson plan. She dimmed the lights and played a clip of Jasmine's calm voice cutting through Trump's fury. When the lights came back on, the classroom was quiet, not out of confusion, but because 12-year-olds had just seen courage in its purest form. In Ohio, a retired veteran sat in his recliner, tears rolling down cheeks that hadn't cracked in decades. He muttered to himself finally. Someone stood up to him and didn't back down. His granddaughter sitting nearby would never forget the sound of his voice that day. In Washington, lobbyists made frantic calls. Phones buzzed with messages not meant for public ears: pull the contracts, scrub the files, do not leave a paper trail. The walls of power were rattling. And in New York, a girl no older than 10 pulled out a notebook and scrawled across the top of a page, "I want to be like Jasmine." But where there are ripples, there are waves. Within hours, Trump loyalists flooded the airwaves. They called it a hoax, a setup, the greatest witch hunt in history. Online trends spiked not by accident, but by design. On fringe networks, talking heads shouted, "She's part of the machine. She forged it. She's the real threat to democracy." Yet for every accusation, the receipts stood taller. The voice analysis, the chain of accounts, the codename Project Crimson. Denial cracked under the weight of data. For the first time in years, the louder they yelled, the smaller it sounded. Meanwhile, Jasmine's office phone rang without pause. Her staff filtered calls, half praise, half threats. Some were whispers from whistleblowers who finally felt safe enough to reach out. Others were warnings sharp enough to chill the blood. Drop it or your story ends where you stand. Her chief of staff, Andre McMillan, pressed a hand to his forehead as he read yet another anonymous email. "They're scared," he muttered. "That's how you know we hit something real." Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her focus was forward. That night she sat alone in her Dallas office, the child's letter still on the windowsill. She read it again under the lamplight. And again the words rang louder than any threat: "I want to grow up to be like you." As the investigation moved forward, America fractured in two. On one side, millions rallied not around Jasmine the politician, but Jasmine the symbol. They wore green ink pins. They held signs that read, "Silence ends here." They didn't cheer for spectacle, they demanded accountability. On the other side, the machinery of denial went into overdrive. Conspiracy blogs spun tales about foreign operatives planting envelopes. Radio hosts mocked the child's letter as probably written by staff. But deep down, the fury reeked of fear. Because once truth escapes, it can't be shoved back into the envelope. It didn't stop at America's borders. In London, the Financial Times ran the headline, "Project Crimson U.S. Funds and Global Shadows." In Dubai, bank officials scrambled, quietly freezing accounts connected to the trail Jasmine had exposed. In Cyprus, a registrar's office mysteriously caught fire, though locals whispered it wasn't the first time records disappeared overnight. World leaders watched closely. Some smiled quietly, pleased to see cracks in the armor. Others clenched their jaws, knowing if Jasmine Crockett could pull down a former president, no one else was untouchable either. But history never comes free. Jasmine's team worked around the clock, but the weight grew heavier. Anonymous cars lingered outside her office. Packages arrived unmarked. Her family fielded calls that chilled them to the bone. One night as she walked to her car, Andre caught her wrist. "Take a step back. Just for a day. For your safety." Jasmine pulled free, her eyes hard. "If I take a step back, they win. And if they win, every letter like that, one on my desk, turns into silence. I won't let that happen." Her voice didn't shake. But Andre saw it, the toll etched into the lines of her face. Courage didn't erase fear. It simply refused to bow to it. In living rooms and classrooms across America, people replayed her silence. The way she didn't flinch when Trump roared. The way she pointed to her pin. The way she let the evidence speak louder than rage. It became a blueprint not for politicians but for citizens. Proof that you don't need to scream to break a system. You just need truth and the discipline to let it burn on its own. And that blueprint spread. Workers in Detroit filed a class action suit after uncovering hidden payroll fraud. Teachers in Florida began demanding public audits of education funds. Nurses in California started a whistleblower hotline to report misuse of federal aid. It wasn't Jasmine's hearing anymore. It was everyone's. Late one evening, Jasmine returned to the Capitol Rotunda. The building was empty, echoes bouncing off marble like ghosts of history. She stood under the Golden Dome, the place where she had once lifted her head in silence after the vote. This time she spoke not to the cameras, not to the press, not even to her colleagues, just to herself and maybe to the child who had written in green ink. It was never about me. It was about us, about making sure the next person who dares doesn't have to stand alone. She closed her eyes, the weight pressing down and lifting all at once. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe not in victory, but in momentum. Because courage once seen never disappears. So what now? We keep showing up, asking what's been hidden, demanding what's been erased, refusing to be lulled by chaos or distraction. Because the truth doesn't hide, it waits. And when it's finally brought into the light, it demands one thing: memory. Jasmine Crockett proved that one person can split open a room built to silence her. But the burden doesn't end with her. It begins with us, with what we do next, with whether we let the fire she lit fade into smoke or spread into something no system can contain. Because power doesn't fall with a headline. It falls when enough people stop fearing it. It falls when silence breaks. And that perhaps is Jasmine's true legacy. Not a hearing, not a vote, not even the downfall of a man once thought untouchable. Her legacy is the mirror she left behind, a mirror we can no longer turn away from. So when the question comes, what did you do when it was your turn? There's only one answer worth giving. I didn't look away. I stood. I spoke. I remembered. And with that, the story doesn't close. It continues every time someone else refuses to be silent. Every time a truth once buried is spoken out loud. Every time a child picks up a pen and dares to write, "I want to grow up to be like you." But history is never one moment. It is a chain, and every link demands another. In the weeks that followed, the echo of that gavel spread far beyond Washington. Local newspapers in small towns ran editorials titled, "If She Can Stand, So Can We." Community halls filled with people who hadn't spoken at meetings in years, now raising their hands asking hard questions about budgets, school boards, zoning deals. What began as a congressional showdown started seeping into the smallest corners of American life. For Jasmine, the spotlight was relentless. Her face became a symbol plastered on murals in Detroit, on t-shirts in Los Angeles, on protest posters in Atlanta. But behind the imagery was exhaustion. She still woke at dawn, studied legal briefs until her eyes blurred, and carried the weight of knowing that every move she made would be dissected, distorted, or dismissed. And yet the letter from the child remained on her windowsill, a compass that steadied her through the storm. The opposition did not sleep either. Investigations into her finances were launched, all baseless, all designed to distract. Anonymous accounts online spread rumors about her past. One senator even called for her censure, claiming she had weaponized Congress for theatrics. But each attack backfired, not because she fought them all, but because ordinary people had already seen the truth with their own eyes. They remembered the red envelope. They remembered the silence that outlasted the shouting, and no smear campaign could rewrite that memory. One evening, Jasmine walked into a crowded town hall in Dallas. She expected anger, division, chaos. Instead, she was met with something else: standing room only filled with people who looked at her not as a celebrity but as proof. A farmer in the front row stood and spoke with a quiet drawl. "I don't trust politicians, but I trust what I saw when you didn't flinch." The room erupted in applause, not because of partisanship, but because of recognition. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't bask. She simply nodded, then leaned into the microphone. "You don't need me to keep this going. You just need to remember that silence doesn't protect you. It protects them." The crowd went quiet again, but it wasn't fear. It was resolve. And in that stillness, the legacy of one hearing grew into something far larger, a reminder that truth once spoken belongs to everyone. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.